Well, Jen, thank you for joining
Hello.
me. I'm excited to talk to you today about the KLAS scale.
I'm excited to talk about it too, because we have lots of questions that we want to answer.
I am sure. So as a CSM working with vendors who are new to KLAS, or sometimes they've worked with KLAS for years, what are the most common questions you get about our 1 to 9 rating scale?
That's an awesome question. So some of the things we hear is, what does the 1 to 9 scale mean? Is 1 good? Is 9 good? Is 5 average? And so making sure that our vendors understand how that scale works is really important.
So let me answer some of those questions. So I get to be in a unique seat where I get to not only do analysis, but I get to read what customers say and see the scores right next to them. And I've learned a few things about the scale I'd love to share with you.
I would love to learn.
So first of all, 1 to 9, 1 is bad, 9 is good, or as we defined it on a phone call, 9 means you are highly satisfied in an area as a provider, and 1 means you are dissatisfied. And 5 is in the middle. But one of the things that I have found over the years is that providers don't necessarily interpret the scale that way. So an average experience is not going to be rated a 5. So the way that oftentimes people use the scale, and there are some differences, we'll talk about software versus services, but if you rate a 9 on a 1 to 9 scale in an area, that often means you are exceeding most expectations for the client or the provider.
Yes.
An 8 generally means on the software side, you are meeting the expectation. And this is where there's a very critical difference between software and services. So meeting expectations is an 8 in software, but if you get an 8 in services, it means you're generally meeting expectations, but there might be a few misses.
That's good to know.
There is a very, very high bar for service firms because if a provider is going to a third party to help them with something, whether that's change management or they're outsourcing part of their rev cycle, they're really expecting that you're going to not only do it well, but do it much better than they could ever do themselves, so that scale ends up being, they look at it a little bit different.
Yeah, you just can't do well. You have to do really well and exceed expectations.
Yes, that has been the key in services we found. Moving on with that scale, on the software side, if you get a 7, it means you're mostly meeting expectations, and there may be an occasional problem here or there that might be reported. And on the the services side, that's where if you get a 7, it means there are probably some significant misses. There are probably some areas where a firm does well, but in that area, the provider usually has some significant concerns.
There was a hot spot.
Yes. And then as you get down into the 6s, you really just have 6 and below are varying degrees of frustration. If we see anything below a 6, a 5 and below, that is incredibly rare to actually see in our data, and usually indicates that there is a major problem that is not only frustrating for the provider, but oftentimes is actively preventing their organization from being successful. So if it's a solution where integration is really important and they rate a 5 in that area, critical information is probably not getting from point A to point B, as an example.
Absolutely. You know, as a CSM, when we see scores like that, that's when we want to have conversations with our vendors and be proactive and talk to them about it, because they want to know what's going on. We want to know we have the same end goal in mind. But yeah, when we see a 6 or below, time to have a conversation.
So knowing that, I guess my advice to vendors that use our data, since they're not going to be looking at each individual survey, a great time to reach out to your CSM or the research director you work with is if in any given area, your average score is below a 7, that's usually a good time to start a conversation. If it's mid 7 or below on the services side, that's often an indication that there's a conversation that we can have and bring some additional data and specific insights to the table.
Yeah, let's be proactive about it. Let's have the conversation early when we can do something about it, rather than waiting when it becomes a bigger problem.
Excellent. Well, I hope I answered all the questions that I need to about the scale. Anything else lingering that I need to address?
No questions from me. On a scale of 1 to 9, I'd give you a 9 for this information.
Yes, I'm exceeding expectations. You were a 9 yourself.
Thank you.